Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, everybody. It is a real pleasure for me to do this introductory webinar to our series. And as Rachel mentioned, today we are talking about data fusion, and we're looking at ways how we're looking at data, how we're combining data, and how we're promoting it in new ways to solve transportation solutions. So I want to dive right in and introduce to you, we have a phenomenal set of panelists. So first we have Sherry Kish. She's Manager of Business Development at HNTB in Columbus, Ohio. She was formerly the Director of Technology for the City of Columbus and the lead for the data management and privacy plans for Smart Columbus and Texas DOT projects. And by trade, she's a lawyer. Then I'm going to move on to Michael. Michael Pack is the founder and director for the Center for Advanced Transportation Technology Laboratories at the University of Maryland, where he oversees data scientists, software developers, systems integrators, and transportation professionals, and to make federal, state, and local transportation data more accessible and usable. So looking forward to hearing more about that. And Anne is a professional engineer from AECOM, permanently assigned as a consultant to the Florida DOT in Orlando. She is a specialist in transportation systems management and operations, application development, asset management, and geographic information systems. So welcome, everyone. So we're going to start off by asking each of our panelists to give just a brief overview of where their lens is looking at the fusion of data sets. So I'm going to go right in, and Sherry, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the super important project. As Tracy said, my name is Sherry Kish. I've been with HNTB for almost 5 years. They gave me my little 5-year square early today, so I've got a couple weeks left, but I'm so excited to be here today to share some fun projects that I've been lucky enough to work on, and that I'm still working on some of these, but they're going to come rapid fire at you. So this will set the foundation for some of the questions we'll have earlier. So just so you know what kind of projects we're talking about, these are all that have data fusion involved. So first up, I want to talk about Smart Columbus. As some of you know already, US DOT put out a Smart City Challenge. It was a $40 million grant, 78 cities went after, and the City of Columbus won that grant. I was at the City of Columbus helping out reviewing applications and understanding what was going on, and starting with the project team when I came over to HNTB, who is actually the program manager for it. So my first job was working on parking applications. So we're going to start there. So event parking management was an application where the city was trying to merge public data and private parking information into one application, instead of having to go on their website and find where the meters are, especially ADA meters or EV charging meters, electric vehicle charging meters, or the private parking information. So the city was already working with a company called Park Mobile to create the Park Columbus experience. And so it's an app and a website that we came up with that has, again, all of the public parking meter locations, all of the information behind them to make sure you know what kind of meter you're getting, if there's a valet zone going on, if the price changes throughout the day, there are notifications for that. If there are only set time periods, of course, all the private parking information to be able to get you into any of the private parking garages or lots in the area. We also merged information from our tourism group, Experience Columbus, about events that are going on in the area. That would be specialty parks that host summer events, some of our groups that do the concerts, all that good stuff, so that you could look for that area of where you're going for the concert and then automatically see the local parking. And some of those event organizers can even put in special codes to ticket buyers to give them reduced parking. And then finally, the coolest part of this one was that we actually added in event parking analytics for parking payment information. So we took historic information from the city that talked about who parked where when, how many of it, who parked with coins, at the actual meter, who parked with credit cards at the meter, who parked with the app with credit cards, added all that information together to come up with predictive analytics to give a red, yellow, green to the end user of, if you're parking in this zone at this time, you will be likely or won't be likely to find a meter in that area. So we were super excited about fusing all that data to make a transportation solution. Another really cool project was prenatal trip assistance. And this project was focused on people who are pregnant and on Medicaid, trying to get them to their medical appointments because it wasn't always happening. And one of the complaints was around transportation. They would have to call a call center 2 days in advance, 2 business days in advance, and then have to wait at their house for 2 hours to be able to get a ride to their medical appointment. Not knowing when the ride was coming, who was picking them up, what type of car, what the driver's name was. A very different experience than those of us who have used an Uber or a Lyft to get somewhere through an app. So we were trying to put that information into an app for those people on Medicaid to get to their medical appointments. The data fusion lesson learned there was that sometimes the data changes pretty frequently. And so we had to have data coming in for the location of all of the medical appointments, and then had to make sure that with the Medicaid providers that those programs were accepting those medical locations. It could be that a Lamaze class pops up at a church, for the next 6 months. That's actually an acceptable Medicaid approved visit and could use transportation to get there, but we were constantly having to change the database there. So some fun lessons learned on that one. Next up, ConnectSmart. It's a Texas DOT project for their Houston office. It is a multimodal trip planning application. Our team is doing data management, data privacy, also building out data lake and data portal for them to collect all this information and de-identify it. But this project is in the midst of collecting data from the transit agency, TransStar, here, INRIX, Waze, the actual trip data from the customers who are using it, carpool program data, traffic and incident data, and other city information. And they're going to be merging that all into the backend system and into the app to make a better more usable transportation system for those there. They're also going to be affecting behavioral change with incentives. And that's a piece that's going to be coming up here in the next year or so. So more to come on that data that will be necessary. Last up, and sorry, this is rapid fire, but it's the I-70 truck automation project. This is another, all of these actually are US DOT grant funded projects. This is another one under the ATC-MTD grant program. This is between Ohio DOT and INDOT, Indiana DOT. We're going to be testing truck platooning, level 2 and level 4 automation technologies. And one of the coolest parts of this project, I don't get to work on directly, it's indirectly, but there's a road audit going on. The Transportation Research Center in Ohio is running a fun gadget-filled car on I-70 between Columbus and Indianapolis. And they're using and collecting all this different data, the physical drive data, the camera images from multiple cameras along the car, the vehicle control system data, weather information. They're getting the lane line data, the signage location data, and they're going to be merging that all into a road audit that they'll be putting out there for other infrastructure owner operators to use. So a really fun project with lots of cool data that's coming in that will be coming out with their report. I can't remember if it's later this year, maybe early next year, but super excited about that. So Tracy, sorry, I may have run over a minute, but wanted to share all those fun projects.
No, those are great projects and great examples of how you can use data and putting it together. And we'll explore more a little bit later on how you actually start to set up and get them kicked off. Michael, I'd like to turn it over to you and hear what your lens looks like.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the director of the CATT lab, and we are a nonprofit applied R&D laboratory at the University of Maryland. In the laboratory, we have about 75 full-time professional software developers, artists, data scientists, and some transportation engineers as well. In addition to that, we have about 30 to 60 student software developers that are all building out tools to make data more readily available and usable by the transportation community. So our focus has generally been on the fusion, analytics and visualization of both the public sector and the private sector data. And we currently operate what we believe to be the world's largest transportation data platform. Our goal is to essentially be the equivalent of like the National Weather Service, but for transportation. So, the National Weather Service was established a long time ago as a federal agency under the Department of Commerce because consistent and reliable weather data was deemed critical to the economy and safety of the citizens of the United States. Now, the transportation system is just as important to the economy and well-being of all citizens, but we really don't have the same type of data availability for transportation. And I know that for the research community, I'm at a university, we usually spend about 50% of every dollar spent on research just on finding and formatting data before we can even start to answer a transportation problem. So that to me is a big waste and a shame. So at the CATT Lab, we desire to consume and make available the nation's transportation-related data for federal, state, and local governments, researchers, and others to make better informed transportation operations planning and investment decisions. And ultimately, the hope is that this will cut down on waste and improve our overall decision making. So many of you know us for our RTMC platform and our probe data analytics that make use of the probe data sets from folks like INRIX, HERE, or TomTom. But more recently, we've been focusing on how we can fuse agency data with third-party connected vehicles data directly from OEMs, Wejo, INRIX, Geotab, and other location-based services data from phones and other mobile devices for analyzing people movement. So these new tools that we've been developing will allow agencies to, like, literally at the flip of a switch, have ubiquitous insights into where people are traveling, what mode they're using, which routes are being taken, the purpose of the trip, like to work or to the grocery store or something like that, and other insights that will help the agency determine where congestion safety issues exist, where demand exists for new infrastructure, like, where do I build a new bridge, how freight and passenger vehicles detour around crashes, or weather events like a big snowstorm, or other events. So we've even managed to replicate ATSPM, or automated traffic signal performance measures, something that traditionally requires tens of thousands of dollars of equipment and communications infrastructure. Instead of doing that, we're using third-party connected vehicles data, and that's immediately giving agencies direct insights into signal performance, turning movements at nearly every intersection in the country for just a couple of $100 per intersection per year, instead of these tens of thousands of dollars that we used to have to spend. And lastly, we've been partnering with the US DOT's Bureau of Transportation Statistics and the Eastern Transportation Coalition to fuse agency-provided crash data with work zone information, with crowdsourced event data from Waze, signal data, weather data, and third-party probe data that I talked about earlier, into a completely free platform that quantifies the causes of congestion, including how much user delay cost is occurring on every national highway route in every county and state in the country. We just released this a few months ago, and it truly is a big data fusion platform. It's at congestion-causes.ritis.org. Again, it's free for everybody. And these big data insights are already changing how agencies are choosing to invest in operations and infrastructure, providing real insights into not just where congestion is occurring, but why the congestion is occurring. Once you know why you have a problem and how big that problem is, you can then start to manage and solve problems in an effective manner. And to me, that's the real power of big data and these fusion technologies, is getting down to that why.
Well, again, fascinating. That is, I realized there was a lot of money that was used to actually combine data and stuff, but 50% of formatting and so on, that's a tremendous number. I am going to now go over to Ann. Now, Ann, you have experience that's more along my realm, but you're talking about actually managing out of a management center and fusing the data there. So let's hear yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tracy. Yeah, I'm working out of the District 5 RTMC, Regional Transportation Management Center here in Orlando. We're operating all the highways in the Central Florida region. I'm a relatively newcomer. I'm a transportation engineer that began work here about a few years ago. And while my successes are certainly a little bit more low to the ground, I'd really like to share what we found in terms of data fusion, both within our office and then with our stakeholders, third parties, the various data sets that we've managed to get into our operations workflows. what we've really found is, or what I personally found when I got in, was a lot of siloed data sets. We had a great job of scoping out software packages. We had a difficult time getting all of that information into the hands of our users. And while that information could be internal software packages, which, of course, was on all of our on-premises servers, we also had access, either contractually or via public data sets to all these third parties that are providing, your probe data providers, your hazard feeds. And we had a ton of detectors out in the field. The deployed hardware is absolutely fantastic. We have detectors, we have wrong way driving. We have, we're getting to the point of connected and autonomous vehicle data sets as well. We have ATSPM information from controllers. And all of these things, we didn't have a good way to get all this information into one place and into the hands of users. So that's really where I came in. I have focused a lot on continuous development and continuous deployment of software. And in doing so, I've kept a relatively small, lightweight application that has made a perfect data fusion environment for our team. Our team is very focused on what's best for our operations, what's best for our stakeholders, how do we get the information to agencies and get them to trust that information. So using all these different data sets for QC purposes is big. I'll give you a great example. We've deployed a GIS environment that fuses the data from detectors on transportation conditions with our probe data providers and tries to assess the quality of both, which provides real-time feedback when a detector is malfunctioning, as well as kind of provides a buffer in case either one of those information data sets, isn't reporting what we'd expect to find. And along with that, we're taking data out of our operations software. Our operators are putting in events, they're putting in hazards, they're putting in FHP alerts, waste alerts, all these kind of things. We're overlaying these on top of all of our condition assessments and giving real-time information directly to our stakeholders, to our internal staff. We have dashboards, and to the general public. A lot of these are very transparent, which is very much in the vein of the goals of the Florida Department of Transportation. And I wanted to touch on that a little bit more before we continue, because I think open platforms are the key to making all of this work. Whenever we have invested in a proprietary system, be it some sort of workflow management or asset management system, a GIS system, or in worst case scenario, some of these hardware provider systems that are entirely proprietary, our hands are really tied. You can't fuse data that doesn't have an accessible API, that doesn't give you access to its SQL database. We've been very, very proactive in eliminating proprietary environments at every level, from our, our personal workstations all the way up to the software that's running the entire RTMC. And in doing so, we've created an environment that's very, very conducive to data fusion. We've been able to build applications from all of these different data streams with relative ease. A lot of these things are very low investment. They're very nimble and can respond to like a need-driven, task work order-based system. And that's been really, really successful in advancing the state of our operations and data management.
Very cool. It sounds better with the mute off. Anyway, all of you have given me some fascinating things. So now I want to go into a little bit, and all of you have touched on this a little bit, but you've all provided different examples. Now, how would you say, how is the public and private entities looking at data differently these days? How have you grown or advanced your respective business modes with it? But how do you look at it differently? And Michael, I'm going to start with you, because you have done a lot of what you're taking in at the university, and from what you've said before, is actually really creating another platform. So how did you start by looking at it differently and pulling that together?
Well, so we were tasked with building our data fusion engines because it was recognized that some of the agencies operating in the Washington, D.C. region weren't sharing their data with one another, even though the system was, operating as one system. The agencies operating a system weren't collaborating. So, that's how we started. But as it pertains to third-party data and agencies, I think you mentioned agencies looking more towards buying data from others as opposed to using their own internal resources. I think every agency is different. Some agencies have fully embraced third-party data and are buying it and starting to decrease their own investments in sensors, especially in places where it's difficult to maintain sensors. In other cases, there's still a show me mentality or a lot of distrust of some of these third-party data sources, despite maybe the fact that they've been validated umpteen times by other agencies. I think every agency thinks that they're different and their roads somehow are magically different from everyone else's. I think everyone's pretty much embraced third-party speed data. Like no one really questions that much. I think the new frontier now is in trips data, connected vehicles data, and third-party volume data, which still somewhat relies on agency sensors. I think it would be a fallacy for agencies to think that they could just buy third-party volume data and stop entirely in investing in their own agency infrastructure for volume data collection. There's going to have to be some investment there until there's a greater percentage of connected vehicles out on the roadway.
That's an interesting thing. So Sherry, I'm going to go over to you and ask you pretty much the same question. You also have the point of looking at, with the Smart Columbus, at the city point of view of kind of the public and also dealing with the private side. And how do you see that connection building?
Yeah, I really see it from my time at the city when I worked in the mayor's office for about 10 years and then went into, as you said, the Department of Technology. And I really feel like I saw a shift from entities really looking differently at the data and wanting more of it. They understand the value of it and they want it in a more digestible way. They were getting it. I think back to, we used to have the same thing that New York City had. They had a stat meeting. You'd come in, you'd ask the departments to come in and share information with you. So public service would come in and talk about how many potholes were filled, but it was one singular data set. There was no fusing of the information that we really had at our fingertips. What was the weather like for those same months over year? What did it look like? How many employees were we employing at the time? How much money were we putting toward it? How did the money change? And so what we see is that governments are truly understanding the value of data, but they can't take it all in these singular data sets. They need it to be fused. They need it to be in a dashboard. And it's just so exciting now to see that we're able to do those things. And I know we had a prep call with Michael and we got to hear about his dashboards. And I know even internally at HNTB, we have some dashboards for positions like mine. And it's just all there at your fingertips, and you don't have to take the time to open up each one of these and try and analyze them separately. And so I see that value shift in the minds of the government entities.
I think you made a good point there. I think people do recognize the value of data now more than ever, but do they really know what data they're looking for? And I'm going to ask you to answer that one first.
Yeah, oh boy, because I took this question a different way. I'm thinking about the way that, users expect to have their data now. They expect to see real-time information. They expect to have it on their phones. And no amount of data validation compares to someone sitting on the road browsing their phone because they're stuck in traffic and they see your application and they're comparing what they're looking at to the information coming out of your system. So I think that the fact that we have a lot of feedback coming in, I think the fact that users expect a lot of access to their data is really a cool opportunity in data fusion because it puts to work a lot of data that has previously just been warehoused and used more for like a periodic reporting purpose, and really allows us to get feedback on what's working and what isn't, and what users actually want this data for, what actually creates value to the end users and stakeholders.
I'm trying to decide which one to go next, but I think I'm going to start with, how does someone listening get started on fusing data or fuse their data with outside data? How would an agency just get started or reach out? And Sherry, I'm going to ask you first this time.
Sure, thanks. I think the biggest thing is we've talked about big data fusion for transportation solutions, right? What are we trying to solve for? Understanding what your problem is a great foundation to then be able to look at what data do you already have access to. Is it all in the same format so that it can be fused? Do you have a data governance process in place? Do you have someone who's looking at data privacy issues, data security issues? Do you really know what your business needs are? There's a huge foundation that you can lay when you're thinking about data to, just basically laying the foundation to then even get you started. But first step for sure is knowing what data you even have access to.
So Michael, you had mentioned before, you have one of the largest transportation platforms of putting it together. So how does your data governance work in there? How did you establish it and then bring it in, or talk a little bit more about how you handle that?
Well, it had to grow organically because we started out as a 3-agency system, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And so we had a small governance board, but then we started to grow, and now we've got, close to 40 agencies participating in some way, 40 states participating in some way, shape, or form. So we've put together user groups that are part of our management process. They decide, the agencies decide what should and shouldn't be added or built into the system. And we always build what they want us to build. When it comes to the data and the data governance, the data is not owned by us. The CATT lab is a steward of the data on behalf of the agency. And so we claim no ownership, and we don't do anything with the data that the agency doesn't want us to do themselves. And if they decide to leave us for whatever reason, they take their data with them.
That's interesting. So Anne, kind of the same thing is, when you bring in, like I said, you have different types of proprietary data and stuff. How do you get the people to actually share the data with you? How do you, and I think we talked a little bit about this in the prep thing. Is it a feel good, or is it a business proposition? It is, it becomes mandated by whatever jurisdiction you're in. So how does it work? How does it work in Florida?
That's a great question. And yeah, it is all about what data is available to you. I want to echo what Sherry said. That's an excellent comment. I'll give a good example of how we've been able to access data that was previously inaccessible. It was actually happened this morning. We had a conversation with a third-party vendor, and we started the conversation with, here's our data. We've deployed an API. If you need a personalized route to be ingested in your downstream systems, we can provide that to you. But this is all of our first responders' AVL locations while they're on scene at an incident, at an event. So if that's our road rangers stop to pick up debris, or if they're responding to an accident, whatever that is being provided live with almost low latency. We're talking about like less than 30 seconds latency directly to these third-party providers. And what we open with is, here, take it. We just want you to have it because it's in the interest of their safety and the safety of the motoring public. And they said, great, we'll ingest this. What else do you want to talk about? We proceeded to then say, well, I know you have this product that typically people pay for, but we actually would take it internally. We would never expose it to the public or other vendors or anything like that. We would take it and use it as an alerting system so that we can help find more events, so that we can get responders to those events faster. That's the sole reason we want to put it out there, and we have a great infrastructure for this. Is that something you'd be willing to provide? And they were super open to it. And I think that's going to be another success story in this data sharing approach. So if the issue is getting access to data sets, there's actually a lot that can be gained by simply reaching out and saying, hey, in the interest of the greater good, and if that's safety, if that's sharing information that really should be publicly accessible, whatever that might be, there tends to be a lot of support for that among vendors, among agencies, among just about everybody. And we've been very, very happy with the success we've seen with that.
And Michael and Sherry, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of maybe respond to that. And then I know that we want to talk about partnerships, and we do have a question, but we want to also talk about workforce. That was on the question, workforce needed for this. But any other, how do you get people? I mean, is yours all a feel-good proposition, or sometimes is it just a business proposition? Here's how we can make this work for you.
My experiences, at least 10 years ago when we started this, were that I struggled to convince people about the public policy, the public good benefits of sharing data. I think at the time, most of the people I was trying to get data from, the agencies, were scared of having their data be used against them, or airing dirty laundry or something like that. So I found more success, at least with my agencies, especially with the law enforcement folks, computer dispatch data, in offering them something first. So if the police department would share their computer dispatch data with them, I would then give them in return a tool that would allow them to analyze their data and figure out where they have issues with staffing, or where they have maybe some other HR problems that they might want to deal with, or other stats. And it was then difficult for the managers at those law enforcement agencies to turn that down because they wanted those capabilities. So then they'd share their data. That's starting to change now. I think maybe we just have some better people in office that are recognizing the public good of data. But that's what I had to do a while ago.
And Sherry, any thoughts?
So I'll go on what Michael was first talking about. With Smart Columbus, we ran into an issue where some of the companies were like, we don't care what you want it for, like we're not giving you that. So it's like, okay, so we had to change our approach and realize we couldn't just ask for a data set. We had to go back and say exactly what type of data do we need, let them know how we were going to use it exactly. Sometimes skinny down the list, tell them how we were going to store it, who, like Ann said, who's going to actually have access to it. So there was a lot more to the data sharing. Have a legit data sharing agreement in hand, ready to share with them to understand how, so that they have complete comfort of how it's going to go, and then think about what's in it for them and make sure that you're selling that point too if you really need that data. So those are just kind of more lessons learned from live experience being turned down.
Okay, and I am seeing the questions that are coming up in the chat box, but I'm going to we're working our way towards them, so I want you to know we will answer them. But one of the questions, we've talked about the data in here. I wanted to see how difficult is introducing these data applications into legacy systems. Most states have homegrown systems, they have old systems, and then they certainly we'll move right into workforce after this. They often do not have the personnel trained to do that within their internal resources. So I know external is part of it, but how difficult is it to bring it into a legacy system? Any of you have a history with that?
Sure, I can start there. I mean, the city of Columbus had those issues. I mean, especially when Smart Columbus came on board and they're like, hey, all you departments, give us your data. We want all of it. We're going to put it in this big, huge data portal called the operating system. And then when they sat down, they're like, wait a second, your street is different from this street, is different from how you put city, state together. And so it was like, wait, we need to create a solution. And they did, through the operating system, create a solution as it's coming in, that it was actually, quality checked, and then they would convert it at the time it came in. And they were able to do that through technology, which ended up helping a lot and saving the time. But that most basic level with those legacy systems that were built from the ground up is they don't have that Excel spreadsheet of the columns named the same exact thing, and it's got to happen. So I know at the city, they were putting in a data governance plan that dealt with procurement, and they started to answer those questions of, if you're going to procure any technology, any data that comes out has to come into these categories. It needs to be named these things, having that similar name format, so that as they move forward, it's getting easier and easier to work with. But the Smart Columbus operating system team was able to create a solution to take different types of data and fuse them together still and make them usable for the people who are using that website.
Oh, thank you. Ann?
Oh boy, yeah, I've got a lot to say on this subject. We have tried to get data out of every legacy system you can imagine. We've had users upload spreadsheets, we've gone through mainframes. We have scraped data off of plan sets, PDF plan sets, just by recognizing character patterns in them, and everything in between. Not everything is a modern REST API where you can just get your data packaged for you. And what we've really found is some things work and some things don't. The important thing is to fail quickly. What we've found is that if it's going to be worth the effort, you want to find out as quickly as possible. So you'll take some subset, you'll take some abbreviated process, you'll leave off the vast majority of the features that you're interested in to get the shortest point, essentially from A to B, and then see, is the end product worth it? Is this data any good anymore? Sometimes it's a lot of information that's hard to get elsewhere. Sometimes it's just kind of junk by now. So you need to know if the data quality is worth it, and if all the effort it's going to be to extract this data, justifies that. In some cases, again, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. We've just found that the process is so highly variable. The most important thing is to understand what you're dealing with as quickly as possible.
Thanks. And Michael, you have come from a slightly different one. I know you started with 3 agencies, but you kind of built yours up. Did you have, so I'm presuming, and this may be a wrong assumption, you've set your data governance in early and kind of set standards as you built the platform?
Well, we tried to do that. It didn't work because if you tell agencies that you'll consume their data if said agency puts data in a particular format, every agency has a different vendor, a different system, whatever. They're not going to spend the money to pay their consultants to reformat their data just for me. So we had to say, we'll take the data however you can get it to us, then we'll do the standardization and the fusion here, and then we will make that data available to others through a then standardized API if they want to then reconsume their data and other people's data. But yeah, we'll take the data however it can be given to us.
But then you do the work for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to go right into the questions. So can you talk a little bit about staffing qualifications needed to address these data needs? So who would like to go first? Or I can choose. All right, Michael, I'm going to go back to you.
Well, I mean, there's 2 schools of thought on this. There's one, do it yourself and transform your agency so that it has the in-house capabilities to do all the things you need to do to manage and fuse data. And I think there is definitely an argument made about that. It takes a long time to change your agency and get those capabilities. And if you're successful in doing that, but you only have, one person deep in each skill, and that one person gets hit by a bus or decides to go to the private sector, you're screwed. So, you really have to have a lot of resources to have a robust staff to support this. So that's where we've been arguing for, well, let's share the investment in having someone like us come in and do some of the data fusion for you, not all of it. I mean, you have to do some stuff in-house, but if we all fund a platform a little bit, it'll be a lot cheaper and we'll have more capabilities than if we all build our own thing in-house. Now, everyone has to do something in-house. I'm not saying we can just write a check and be done with this, but for the model that I'm pursuing, it's a bit of an outsourced model.
So Ann, and actually this is Ann and Sherry, you have dealt more with something on the in-house and having to grow what you had available there. How were you able to upgrade? Were you able to upscale their skill sets to meet some of these challenges? And why don't you go first?
Sure. Okay, sorry. Yes, absolutely. And what we really found was that everyone needs to be pretty in the loop on all the disciplines that are present. And there are a lot of them in an environment like an RTMC. So we have a lot of cross-disciplinary things. We have a lot of different hats. If you have a software developer and a GIS person and they are totally sitting on the opposite side of the room, never working with each other, then your software is never going to do geoprocessing. And that's a key to combining data sets. And you could say the same thing about operations. You can say the same thing about engineering. And, I can't really speak to how, you necessarily staff an organization on this, but I can say that emphasizing, putting everyone in a room, working together and understanding what each other does has been very, very important in finding success with this process.
And I think that kind of follows up on what Michael was saying, but Sherry, would you like to add?
Sure. One of the things when we go out and we talk about Smart Columbus and how the project was successful, one of the major slides we talk about is staffing for it, because we probably had 14 or 15 different disciplines across the board just on the HNTB team and people from multiple states working on it. As you said earlier, I'm an attorney, not with a background in transportation, but I do have a lot of contract experience. So data sharing agreements, data privacy, understanding data security came into play a lot. We had a chief privacy officer that we hired on board to make sure that we were treating the data appropriately, since we did have access to PCI, credit card information and public health information, as well as just regularly personally identifiable information. We had our transportation engineers, we had intelligent transportation solution engineers, we had the software developers, we had data analysts. We had a data curator. I saw he was on, I was just scanning for his name. He might have had to drop off, but we had a specialist from Battelle who curated all the data, who checked it all over for quality. You really have all of these different disciplines that all play a role. And I agree with Anne, by the end of it, we started to understand what everybody else did. And it was really helpful to get everybody in a room and talk through it as we were ready to say, get a data set from an entity and say, okay, what responsibilities do we have? How is the data coming in? We would have these large group meetings and talk through the data set, talk about the ingestion process, how we were going to protect it, how long we were going to store it, all that good stuff. You need all of these different disciplines to make it work. And I agree with Michael, you would like to have one of all of those people, but that's, what can happen. You might lose one of those people to winning the lottery instead of getting hit by a bus. But yeah, there's a lot of people that go into making it successful. And so you have to look internally at your agency and say, where am I good? Where am I not good? Where can I train someone? Training was a big component for us, even from security and privacy. We trained every person who was touching data on data privacy and data security to make sure that everyone across the board had the same level of understanding. So lots of people for a great process, because there's great output.
I was going to get a little bit more granular though, because a lot of and I'll speak more from a state background, we have people who grew up in there. We have people like I said, homegrown, and now they're there. They're probably going to be a 30-year person. They've been there for 20, and now technology is rapidly turning over. And I'm talking not only the people who are actually handling the data in like the IT department, but also those who are dealing with the sensors or things out there or calibrating them. How do you have any experience in dealing with that part, or ways to increase their skill sets?
I don't think it's fair to take someone who has been working 20 years as, transportation engineer or whatever, and then tell them, okay, well, tomorrow you're going to become a database administrator, a software developer. That's not cool, and it's not realistic. But I do think you can train those people with enough skills to better manage consultants who do have those skills, so that you're not getting screwed over by those folks. They're not trying to use techno speak to sell you on something that you shouldn't be sold on, just so you understand the lingo. And I know there are a number of documents that USDOT has been putting together recently to try to help with that. One is USDOT has been putting together a data fusion framework document that should be published in the next few months. And it's not a how to do this yourself from soup to nuts. It's how do you understand the terms and the steps, so that if you're contracting this out or working with the people that are building it, that you can have enough skills to be intelligent and have good conversations.
And that's actually is the question, is how you transition the workforce forward. You have them and whatever that skill set is, and you're talking about managing those that are coming in. Anne?
Yeah, I've actually ran into this a lot too. And what I kind of the approach that I've tried to take to it, it's not always going to be possible, but anyone who's not actively developing your Fusion platform, your data processes, is a customer. And that includes people working in the back end, people who are, intensely familiar with the processes and work in the office alongside you, but are not actually the systems, platform kind of people, the data kind of people. And making your application work well for them, making their job easier by using your environment rather than their old way of doing things, actually goes a long way. I talked about, spreadsheet uploads. A lot of our, long-term employees here have these spreadsheets they've been maintaining for years. And when you migrate them to a new environment where they just have buttons they can click on a screen and the software handles all the, the tedious stuff, and they don't have to worry about formulas getting screwed up and that sort of thing, you'd be surprised what a user can learn to do. You'd be surprised what they can contribute to your data fusion environment. I think that's a very important way to engage with your users.
I have a comment here. In 2005, a data access with road weather sensors installed by private vendors, but city-state agencies now have standard agreements that include who owns the data and in what format. And that's whoops. Sorry, the question moved. Is that being done for traffic and smart road applications? I'm sorry, I probably didn't, but city-state agencies now have standard agreements that include who owns the data and in what format. Is that being done for traffic and smart road applications? So basically, are there standard agreements? And I'm not sure that there is yet.
I don't know that there is. When we were working on the parking app, we went to the private parking operators and were asking for data, and they found out that they didn't own it, that the gate arm company, they own the data. And that was very alarming to some of them as it was pointed out to them and as they figured it out. And they kind of took a step back like, oh, wait a second. And I have noticed, especially when the big data storage providers like AWS, when I was in technology, that the question started, okay, well, if I put it in, how much does it cost me to get my own data back? So that started, I think, to put the light bulb on to people to start saying, okay, wait a second. If I put it in your system, can I spit it out, or can I only spit a report out every, month? And so I think that it started over, I don't know, maybe the past 7 years would be when I think I was in technology. So I think people started to think about it, but I don't know that there's any standardization around that ownership.
I would say look at the Eastern Transportation Coalition, formerly the I-95 Corridor Coalition. They've done a lot of work with standard data use agreements and data sharing agreements when you are buying data from the third party, which is somewhat similar to installing a system on the roadway. They kind of have the gold standard for what you should be asking for and demanding in your procurements of data.
One thing that we've implemented here is for any users that are accessing our event data, actually not even just users, anyone who accesses this via our publicly available routes actually has to provide an agree message as a response to a request to get the token that they need to actually access that information. So we're not actually tracking who's accessing it, but when it's the kind of information that we really want to be sure that people don't make us liable for, we have this standard agreement that we make sure they've seen and agreed to prior to access the information. As far as I know, that appears to be working. That document has been reviewed by our legal team, and it's another option to make sure people understand the use of the data is somewhat restricted.
Okay, well, I've got another data question. As mobility as a service takes hold for consolidating multiple modes of public and private transportation trip data, do you plan on working with the MOS providers to expedite the process of collecting big data? So do you work with the mobility or the mobility on demand service or mobility as a service providers?
So those folks hold their data tight to the vest because there's so much money to be made or lost from that data getting out. I think I was given access to it once, but I literally had to go to someone's facility to work with that data. I couldn't have it over on my side for fear that it might get out. if there's any hope of this, of mobility as a service data being made more widely available, there needs to be legislation at the state and federal level that essentially says, if you're going to operate these types of vehicles and services on a roadway, you must at a minimum be willing to provide X, Y, and Z back out to the agencies. And I think that's legislation that has been needed for quite a long time and we failed to act on. And that gets back to a question that Robert Roush asked a little bit earlier that we haven't touched on yet. Can we jump onto that one?
That's what's right in front of me. So, Michael, I'll let you start in there. With the growing availability and volume granularity of vehicle data from various sources, how do you view the impact you expect as OEMs look to ways to monetize the data they are or can collect? How is this likely to affect the ongoing agency collection and use of data?
So the OEMs are already monetizing their data. I mean, they're not giving that stuff away for free. I think the bigger issues are, to whom are they selling it? And the agencies are often buying their data not from the OEMs directly, but from third parties that are aggregating data from OEMs. And if you're comparing company X to company Y, they might both have the exact same data from the same OEMs. And it's, what are they doing with it in the in between that's changing it up? You don't want to buy data from three people and get the same three things. My bigger concern for agencies in the long term is not in the monetization of data, but in the loss of data. I have a feeling we're on the verge of some new laws coming into effect that might limit our our access to these data sources due to privacy concerns and other issues. The European Union is looking at these already ahead of us, and I fear we've developed a lot of really great applications that might have to get turned off before too long. That's my fear.
That's a really good point. Ann, Sherry, you have something to add or a view on that one?
Go ahead, Ann.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I'll jump in. This is a different take on it, but one of the concerns through Smart Columbus, we talked to a lot of those third-party providers who had pro vehicle data, OEM data, that type of stuff. One of them turned into almost like a data ethics issue. If we were truly trying to collect data across the city and it was only what could be considered a higher end vehicle that they were pulling the data from, it gave us a data ethics issue of if we were truly really collecting the data and if we were making decisions on solutions or how to spend money in areas, were we really equalizing the opportunity if we only had data from an OEM that was considered a higher end vehicle that would not be present across the city. So just a tinge off of the subject, but just an important matter.
And I wanted to add on to what Michael is saying. So if that data stream were cut off, we've definitely taken steps to make sure that our field hardware, it is still capable of doing the thing that we often rely on this third-party data to do. And what we often do is use that third-party data currently to quality check those hardware, because the hardware can be difficult to maintain, to verify, to validate, that sort of thing. But when you have these two different sources that are providing similar data sets, it's been really efficient for us to, the data fusion concept, put these into the same bucket, compare the information we're getting, figure out how best to combine them to get the best possible output. And so if one stream cuts out, either due to hardware malfunction or legislation, we always have the other stream as a backup.
Okay, and then we got 2 questions left, but then we need to wrap up. As always, the hour goes by fast. Are you aware of any pool fund program in place, or if one has been considered for mobility data fusion related to research? I'm going to say no, we're not aware. And then also, public agencies are beginning to view data as an asset, which is definitely true. Do you have any examples where a DOT has included data in their transportation asset management plans or ongoing efforts? I think there's a lot of data collection being used. And I'm just going to put in here from working with the state of Nevada. We were definitely going to more field collection and going to put it into asset management, but also combining some different data to look at the condition and put that into kind of a maintenance program. So you're just ongoing putting in, but I'll open that up real quick and then we'll do some conclusion remarks.
I'll jump in and say that for HNTB worked on something with the Ohio Department of Transportation to track all electric vehicle registrations and did a bunch of data fusion on the backside, spit it back out into a super cool dashboard for them. And that's how they're looking at their EV charging plan. And they created an electrification plan for the whole state based on that type of data.
Michael?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what they mean by putting, using the data as an asset. Like I think agencies should not be trying to make a buck off of their data for the most part, because most of the data that agencies collect have been collected using public dollars to begin with. And I think there's a greater return on investment for having that data be made as publicly available as possible, and all the benefits that come with that for research, for traveler information. You don't want to inhibit traveler information. You want people to know what's going on out there so they can avoid problems and reduce congestion, delays, and safety issues. Same thing goes for other data assets. That doesn't mean it's not valuable. It should be valued, but the way we value it isn't who's willing to pay for it, but what value are we getting in return for making it available to others.
And I do think most public agencies aren't charging, but that's looking at it as an asset and how they can do it in asset management plans and so on. However, we are at the end of the hour, but Mackenzie has a great question. So I thought I would ask each of you to do one quick closing remark. What are some of the most exciting data sets you see at the moment and why? For 1 minute each. And I'm going to start with you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, there's a lot to be excited about. There is so much data out there to get. But the one that I'm really, really excited about personally isn't a new data set to many of you. It's just ATSPM data. The reason I'm excited about it now is because, this process of getting, ATCs deployed to intersections and getting this information via ATMS to our RTMC. These are a lot of acronyms, I apologize. This is all about signalized intersection operations and real-time management of those. And this process has been maturing over the past few years, but we are now at a place where it's all deployed sufficiently to be doing much, much more with than we currently are. And I want to get this information out to local agencies and to every possible stakeholder. I want these things to be used in public-facing applications. And I really want to see what we can do to improve the operations of arterial highways without spending a dime, simply by making use of the data that we put so much effort into simply collecting. And that's a big fusion opportunity that really isn't well addressed in almost any cases that I've been able to see so far.
Great point. Michael?
Yeah, for me, the most exciting data is anything related to vehicle or mobile device locations. So if you can know where a vehicle or a mobile device is every second or 3 seconds, there's so many things you can do with that to better understand how your system is functioning, trends in migration patterns over time, monitoring evacuations, a version of ATSPM. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can do with that data, and that's the most exciting to me.
That is cool stuff. And Sherry?
I agree with Michael, but it scares me from the privacy side, spending so much time on privacy. But mine is really around that electrification. We've been lucky enough to be working on these national electric vehicle infrastructure plans that are being required by USDOT and FHWA. And we're starting to meet with our partner states in Ohio, and Kentucky actually is meeting at 2 o'clock today. But really working with them and saying, what's the synergy between all of the data that we have on all these electric vehicle registrations? What are these alternative fuel corridors that we're looking at? What are you guys thinking? What are we thinking? And how can we merge all that, not to just make an Ohio plan, but truly make a regional plan for interstate access to EVs? And my hope is to buy an EV this year. So I'm going to data fusion all the EV information in my head to pick a car.
All right. Well, thank you guys. You have been phenomenal. We are right at the top of the hour, but thank you guys so much. You have given us a lot of information and a lot of things to think about.